My name is Silvia Toscano. I am an associate professor. That's my rank. And I've been teaching for 14 years at the community college level. The subjects that I've taught and I've continued to teach over the past 14 years are English, and I've taught all levels of composition there, from like 2 levels below freshman comp to 2 levels above freshman comp. I also teach literature classes, more recently Mexican and Chicano literature and Native American literature. I'm also done California literature as well. And then I also teach in the social sciences division at my college. So I teach Chicano psychology and more recently Chicano anthropology.
Yeah.
The reason for that, Santiago, is because a lot of our students lack access and exposure to that knowledge for a variety of reasons and a variety of ways. If we're just keeping it within the school system, like pre-K through 20, that pipeline, it's a Euro-Western centric perspective throughout the whole, curricular assignments and all of that. And then as they, get into the higher education, the canon of thought, say in a particular field of study, whether it be psychology or sociology or anthropology or English, or even in the STEM fields in particular, they have those canon of that canon of thought for each of those subjects is still very much, guided by these Euro-Western perspectives and authors. So that's just like within the school system. And so also come to my knowledge in talking with students that they lack access and exposure at home también, and even in the media, right? So there really isn't access or exposure to cultura, to ancestors, or to ancient knowledge. So for that reason, a lot of our students are ungrounded because of that, and maybe to a certain extent unrooted. So I like to go back to Ramon Roosevelt, who has stated that, at least within the university system, 6% of the world is represented in our school systems. Like the perspective of the population within a global perspective is we're only getting 6% with those canons of thought, and that's very limiting. And that's not, to me, providing our students with a good, well-rounded, expanded, and amplified educational experience. And so when they are exposed, it's typically misrepresentation or underrepresentation, right? So I think we have a lot of things to correct, and I see my role as trying to help students or facilitate the process or guide them in unlearning and relearning and rerouting. Firstly, by saying that in all of my classes, I do try to center Indigenous epistemologies and knowledges. I do also embrace the idea that teaching can be a healing craft. I wrote about that a few years back, and I still feel that that's very true, and I've witnessed it, several times. So the assignments and the books that I choose are coming from this kind of centering of Indigenous epistemologies, and the idea that we as educators can promote a healing space. Just like baby initial steps, right, for students to begin to question and ask and reflect mostly. So some of the assignments, for example, and the books that I choose, because I have a Chicano studies background, it's like interdisciplinary, so, or transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, whichever words we want to intersect there. And that's important, again, to amplify students' exposure to multiple perspectives and lenses. This is part of your work too, right? Like, the more exposure they get to that, the better, in my opinion. So for English, say, for example, in the critical thinking class, they will learn about decolonizing methodologies, right? And they will be asked to apply those methodologies in a research paper that asks them to do qualitative research. So For example, one of the assignments that they're doing this semester is a case study, a family case study. So they're going to learn about traditional ecological knowledge as a concept, and then they're going to select somebody from their family, hopefully, and then interview that person. And throughout that whole process, they're being guided in decolonizing methodologies and critical qualitative research, right? Those approaches, and so it gives them the opportunity to venture into that kind of realm. But it's still being, we're still building off of like a short story or the literature, right, in that kind of sense, and then we're just expanding on the literary arts by also bringing in and bridging it to the social sciences in many ways. For my my Mexican and Chicano literature class, one of the assignments that I do for the Chicano studies classes in particular is assign cultural events. So students have to attend an event that's come into my awareness or that I know about through link-ups with the community, and so they're required to attend at least one event outside of class and do a reflective paper where they have to summarize what they saw, what they witnessed, what they observed, link it back up to class course content, and then just give their opinion on what they learned or que aprendieron en esa experiencia teniéndola. So that's been really transformative for a lot of students because it just gives them that, it takes it outside the four walls, it takes it outside the black and white on the paper, and they get to breathe it, live it, walk it, smell it, and then they usually bring somebody with them, and so it's something that they're doing in community or con familia, and I find that those assignments are really, I love to read those because they're being real in those assignments. And then books también, for all of these classes, given the fact that I'm centering indigenous epistemologies, or in the Chicano studies classes, those Chicano-Chicana voices. So typically it's, majority of the authors are, Raza authors, or those that come from indigenous backgrounds or identify that way. In the past, I've done like the Zapatista movement, so we've read a lot of the communiques and the things that were being put out by the EZLN. That was one semester that I did that. Actually, for a few, it usually sticks like 2 or 3 semesters. In one of the Mexican and Chicano literature classes, I did focus on healers in particular. So we did like Bless Me Ultima, we did Let Their Spirits Dance, we did The Hummingbird's Daughter. So each of those novels had a healer in there, and so we got to really embrace that aspect. Right now, in the Mexican and Chicano literature class, we're looking at Mesoamerican women and knowledge, and we're just using that as a starting point. It is a very academic text, but we're using it as a starting point to get the archival, historical background and setup from an academic perspective, and then I'm going to bridge that to community people, mujeres in particular, that are breathing naturally at home. The focus is on the feminine energías. So just giving them the access. We're going to read about it and we're going to do all the historical archival stuff, but you're also going to get face-to-face exposure with some of the mujeres and just the collectives that are around here in LA. We have so much to access from our community. So I think that just enhances the academic discourse.
Okay.
Right now, I think I would start in the community, just kind of like a bigger picture, and even the nation, right? Just the political climate that we've been in over the past several years. It's nothing new if we know our history correctly and we're grounded in that understanding. It's nothing new, but for a lot of our students, it is new to them, right? And they're barely, for a lot of them that are young adults, coming into this like awareness and critical consciousness of what's happening around them. And they're starting to see people in their family and community impacted, and even themselves. So that very real racism and discrimination, that's very visceral, that you could feel it, and it's affecting you like in very real ways, that comes into the classroom. They're worried about ¿Cómo va a estar mi papá? Like, how's my dad going to be, you know, when he's traveling from Bakersfield to LA to come to my graduation? Like, is he going to be okay? That on top of, like, maybe health concerns that arise from these lived experiences of being, you know, exploited for your labor and not having you know, an income that really will promote you to be able to have a healthy lifestyle. You know what I mean? Because we're waking up at 4 a.m. and we're working 12 hours a day, todo eso. So that is, you know, overlapping with the home. A lot of times there's stuff with the home challenge in terms of identity conflicts. And this is generational and has to do with geography and just like place, you know, and movement and time. And so a lot of the students that are first generation, you know, have that struggle of, I got to write these papers, I got to do all this work, but you know, I have these responsibilities at home and I'm being expected to bring money in. Yeah. Or yo siento like that I have to, like these students are having to like already function as like, you know, fully functioning adults. And that puts a lot of stress on them, a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety. So that all manifests in the classroom también. So just, I see it, you know, in the side conversations that we have when assignments are coming in late or they're having challenges, even with, because of the curriculum and the way that I focus or I organize the classes, sometimes that brings out historical traumas in the home, ¿verdad? So now they're having to unpack all of that and turn in a paper, so it like collapses into some serious struggles for the students, and I just have to, and I'm very aware of that, so I have to be ready for when those occasions arise and just, you know, give them the flexibility and time and guidance as best I can to help them navigate through those difficulties. But in the long run, I wanted to revisit why, you know, I organize my classes in this way. Is because it grounds them. You know, it gives them a sense of self. It reminds them of who they are. It reminds them of the resources that they do have accessible to them. Maybe they're not getting immediate support from the family. Maybe they are. But they definitely have community that they can connect with, and that can be with the peers themselves, but it can also be with the larger community. So when that becomes manifested in tangible ways, it really helps to ground them and alleviate some of those tensions, some of those anxieties, some of those isolated feelings like I'm doing this all by myself, y no tengo like the proper, you know, apoyo that I need to make this happen. It definitely also increases the student's sense of empowerment as well, which is to me more important than the grammar or the perfect, you know, essay structure that they're going to achieve in a paper. That's very important, of course, if they're transfer, you know, oriented or whatever. But to me, it's more important to have a grounded student that leaves my classroom, that has a strong sense of self, that feels very empowered, that has gained some practice in using their voice to advocate for themselves, que ya no siente tanta pena, right? That they don't feel ashamed of their history or their stories or their struggles. And that's going to impact who they become, you know, as they grow as scholars, but also who they become as practitioners. So those future, you know, social workers, those future social workers, those future educators, people that go into law enforcement, like those people need to be conscious because they're going to be, you know, in positions of power that are going to continue to impact our communities, our brown raza communities, our indigenous communities. And so it's very vital that these students have exposure and access to these knowledges and to these histories that will allow them to make these connections in more profound ways. All right, but it does cut across all races and ethnicities también, which I find it grounds me to see that my Asian students are able to talk about, you know, wars, whether it's, you know, Japan invading China or the United States invading Vietnam, right? Like those, because those have created traumas in their families, right? And they just haven't been given space to examine that. my Armenian students will talk about the genocide and the continued, manifestations of that genocide in their families and communities today. And then, of course, we have students from Central America that, will engage with the civil wars.
Yeah.
So war comes up a lot as part of the trauma. But then maybe for some of my second or third generation Raza students, what I tend to notice a lot are like the addictions.
Yeah.
So an alcoholic father, domestic violence in the home, one-parent households, you know what I mean? And so they develop some language, given the readings that we look at. We look at the editorial by Patricia Gonzalez and Roberto Rodriguez, the 6-page editorial on internalized oppression and shame-based behavior and intergenerational historical trauma. And just in those 6 pages, so much emerges when we begin to apply. How does this look now? How does this look in your own, for yourself, for your family, and for your community? Sometimes they're very reluctant to do those profound self-reflections, but I say it's part of the class, and that's how I approach critical thinking, is to think critically about who you are and how you have come to be in the place that you're in, and let's analyze those factors. That's critical thinking. That's critical consciousness. That's gonna, to me, have an impact at a more profound level.
Yeah.
If we remember that these are students, they're people, they're holistic beings. They're a mind that we want to cultivate, but they're also a body that might be hungry or cold or without a place to sleep. They're also an emotional being with all of the factors that, impact their sense of self. There's anger there, there's sadness, there's frustration, there's confusion, there is joy, there is happiness. There's defeat, there's tragedy, and they're also spiritual beings.
Yeah.
And they also have a higher purpose to be here. And so it's our job to, if we're taking on the responsibility to be in front of 30, 40, 120 students per day, that's a big responsibility. Es un cargo, enormous to me. And so I have to not lose sight of the students' humanity. And that would be my message to everybody. Whatever approach that takes, it doesn't have to be a Chicano studies approach, it doesn't have to be an indigenous pedagogical approach. But if we can remember that the person sitting in front of me is a human being that has so many facets to who they are, and my job is to connect with that student and to just help them and guide them and facilitate the process for them to get to the next level.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.